Hi, Mallory. I'm just going to begin this debate by going over our opponent's points, and if time permits, break it down and show you why it's necessary to affirm this result. Now, to begin, our opponents mentioned in their last few speeches that the schools will be perfectly adequate in handling cyberbullying, but I'd like to bring up the example of the Ryan Halligan case. In the Ryan Halligan case, the school did not take any measures to stop, prevent, or inflict consequences because of cyberbullying. Therefore, Ryan Halligan and his family never got justice for cyberbullying, and this is just one example where schools could not handle it, disproving our opponent's point. And also, if our opponents think schools can handle it, they are putting an enormous burden on our school systems that would just hurt the school systems and hurt the education. So that disproves their point. Also, our opponents have stated that they think if we criminalize it, prosecutors can do whatever they want, but when we criminalize it, we are putting it in a court where there is an objective jury, and they will view it just as any other case is handled. All cases, intent is hard to view and hard to gauge, so this is not any different from any other case, and therefore it should be handled like a murder case or any other case. Our opponents have also stated that we need to ingrain it in our culture, and that is exactly what the affirmative is doing. By criminalizing it, we are showing the world and our culture that cyberbullying is not allowed. Currently, we don't have that. Currently, people don't know if it's accepted, and that's why it's committed so often. The status quo right now is allowing cyberbullying. The legislation for cyberbullying right now is failing. 26% of our country has any form, and every form they have of legislation is failing. Therefore, state legislation is failing, disproving their point that state legislation would be better. And because of those reasons, and that affirming the result would it would be better because it would be handled on a national level. The government has better resources and funding. Our opponents seem to not believe that, but we've proved that state legislations don't have the resources and don't have the funding. Therefore, because they don't have the funding and aren't able to handle it, the only way to handle cyberbullying is on a national level. Thank you.
So for this last speech, I'm going to get up here and go line by line into the fallacies of our opponent's arguments and begin to develop why the negative has won this debate. Now, the affirmative sort of started off on a wrong note with the ambiguity of their definitions and the fact that they didn't defend these definitions or provide any elaboration. Their definition of cyberbullying, which was clearly incorrect and not descriptive enough, as evidenced by the Megan Myers bill, which failed, will just put more discretionary authority in the hands of prosecutors, which, in a 2005 study of over 11,000 cases, 18% of cases have been thrown out as a result of prosecutory misconduct. So prosecutors have an immense amount of authority, which they shouldn't in this case, because they have oftentimes acted wrongly. Now, their definition of a criminal offense. Now, they broke it down into 3 different levels, which could have worked to their advantage had they elaborated upon it. But the fact of the matter is they misspoke and oftentimes contradicted themselves. Now, let's take, for example, that most of these cases would be misdemeanors or minor slaps on the hand. Now, what that means is that there is no deterring effect. People will continue to act because there is no true repercussion. There is no stick to enforce a carrot. Now, that either means that national legislation is completely unnecessary, Or you take the opposite end of the spectrum, where all cases are felonies, and most cases, kids are put under trials. Well, that's incredibly inefficient, as we have explained, and they have failed to debate. Now, they say there is no punishment for cyberbullying, but what I think they ignore is the fact that current statutes such as harassment and invasion of privacy already address cases of cyberbullying. I'm alluding to this Tyler Clemente case, where the two people, Darun Ravi and Molly Way, were tried under invasion of privacy. That they have not addressed. They brought up the case of Ryan Halligan. Well, the fact of the matter is, at the time that Ryan Halligan occurred, Vermont had no statute in place for schools to enforce. Under the Tinker standard, schools are able to enforce both in-school and out-of-school conduct. The negative has proven time and time again why our case stands. The affirmative has failed to bolster their case, rather they have contradicted themselves, and that's why you must begin the resolution. Thank you.
Now, you keep saying that our definition is vague and ambiguous, even though we've outlined it very clearly multiple times. How can you say this when you actually don't have a definition for cyberbullying that can contest ours?
It's not our obligation to provide a definition, but you providing one, we are able to critique it, and what we see is that there's a clear lack of strict definition of legal terminology, any sort of backing that leaves any sort of doubt for arbitrary decisions, because this is a very arbitrary definition you provided. What defines persistent? 5 times 10, 100? I mean, that you have not outlined, and that would be incredibly ineffective if we tried to implement that on a national standard.
But as you are challenging our definition, you have no standards in which to hold it to.
Well, the act of cyberbullying is clear, but what you are trying to do is outline intent and trying to define it.
Isn't it important to outline intent?
It's incredibly important if you're going to try to put people on trial or convict them of something to prove intent, as I outlined from the legal terminology, something that you haven't proven.
All right, now I would like to ask you a question. You said before that all state initiatives have been tried, correct?
Yes.
Or they've all failed, correct?
Yes.
All right, now were all of these state laws the exact same?
They were similar laws in 13 out of 56.
All right, now if all of these state laws have failed, why would one federal law, why would that succeed?
Because state laws are only, cyberbullying, as we stated, is not confined to state borders. Therefore, state legislation is inadequate. It's confined to the country.
That doesn't explain how a federal law would stop cyberbullying when a state law would not.
Well, actually, in state laws, what they try to do is that they try to make it through schools, in which the schools can punish people, and that 42% of the teenage population is still cyberbullied under that.
I have a question. Are you aware that over a 5-year period, a study done in Long Island showed that just through educational programs, they had decreased the rate of cyberbullying by 11%?
Well, I think...
Is that not a success?
I think based on the fact that these programs are being used now, yet 42%, you said 50% of our country is still involved in cyberbullying. I think that proves that the education programs aren't doing enough to stop it, and therefore the status quo is inadequate.
Or maybe there just aren't enough education.
But the thing is that you're not advocating an education program. You're telling us why our resolve would not work.
And
No, we've been
criminalizing...
advocating throughout this debate a soft power approach that emphasizes education and changing people's mindset and changing the culture so that people realize cyberbullying is as wrong as it is,
But-
not by punishing them.
Wait,
Criminalizing it does not exclude education. There can still be educational programs. And under a regulatory offense, there are things such as
okay,
counseling
well, on that
and
note,
tolerance.
can I just clear this up before we go to the final rebuttals? What do you think most of the cases would be tried under? Misdemeanor, felony, regulatory infraction?
Well, because it
It
hasn't been
depends.
stated, we would have no way of knowing.
It
Right?
depends on the severity of the case,
So
and that can be
then they
proven
all
by
be
a jury.
felonies, which you denied before.
No, but you keep saying that everyone is going to be under a
Well,
felony.
could they
which
just
is
as
not
easily
true.
all be misdemeanors and minor
No.
regulatory infractions?